In this lesson, we'll cover using installer mode, which enables special functions for NV authorized dealers. Among these special functions is the ability to store installer settings to the cloud, creating a safe backup after installation that cannot be modified except by the dealer. While the end user can still modify and use their own settings, the saved installer settings can only be modified by the dealer. Authorized dealers can contact madVR Labs to learn how to enable installer mode. Installer mode also allows the dealer to download the settings from the customer's NV, modify these settings, and then upload the revised settings to the NV where the end user can then easily apply those settings. Let's take a look at how all this works. We begin on the Settings Management menu, which we covered in a previous lesson. I've already enabled installer mode, and since that's active, the options are different than what was shown in that earlier lesson. Notice that under predefined settings, we now have an option to store the current settings as our installer settings. So, after setting up a customer's unit, we highly recommend that the dealer store their final settings here for safekeeping. I'll do this now. Next, I'll close this menu and exit installer mode, and reopen the settings menu as an end user would see it. Now when we go to the predefined settings, instead of having only the option to restore factory settings like before, we now have an option to restore the installer settings shown here. Taking this a step further, a similar process can be used for the dealer to remotely manage the settings for the user in the future. Let's go back to installer mode and then return to this menu as a dealer. Notice the Connect to Other NV option. The dealer can use this to manage their customer's configuration remotely. I'll demonstrate. First, I'll enter the customer's serial number here. Notice this now shows the options to download and upload settings for this particular NV. In this case, let's assume the customer has tweaked their settings and is having an issue. The dealer can ask the user to then store their settings into one of the cloud slots so they can help. In this case, the user stored their settings in slot 2. The dealer can then download the customer's settings from slot 2 to their own NV like this. Let's further assume the dealer has now tweaked the user's configuration and is ready for the end user to test the revised settings. To transfer these settings back to the customer's unit, the dealer just needs to enter installer mode, connect to that NV, and use the option to upload settings as the suggested settings. I'll do this now. Okay, now that that's uploaded, let's look at how the end user would then restore these suggested settings to their unit. Once again, I have to turn off installer mode so you can see what the end user would see. Upon returning to the Settings Management menu, in addition to the installer settings which remain on our master, there's now the suggested settings option the user can choose, which we just uploaded. The user can simply select this to apply the dealer's modified settings, and that's all there is to it. Now, if you're wondering about some of the other options in this menu, we covered that in a previous lesson. Okay, now that we covered how to use installer mode for advanced backup and restore options, it's time to move on to our next lesson.